The life of America's revered founding father, George Washington. From his humble beginnings to his pivotal role in the American Revolution and the establishment of the United States. George Washington was born on February 22, 1732, at Pope's Creek in Westmoreland County, Virginia. His father, Augustine Washington, was a wealthy planter and politician who owned several plantations, including Wakefield, where George was born. Augustine had 2 wives, his first being Anne Washington, with whom he had 4 children, including Lawrence Augustine Jr. and John. After Anne's death, he married a woman named Betty Shifington, with whom he had 3 more children, one of whom died in infancy, and the other 2 were George and his sister Betty. As a child, George received an informal education from private tutors, but formal schooling was not considered essential for a boy of his social standing. Instead, he learned surveying from his older half-brother, Lawrence, who taught him the skills necessary to manage his father's vast estate. George's mother died when he was only 11 years old, and by the time he was 17, both of his half-brothers had died, leaving him the eldest surviving male and the responsibility of taking care of his father's plantations. In 1749, 17-year-old George Washington began surveying the western lands of his father's estate along the Potomac River in present-day West Virginia. The land was covered with dense forest and difficult to navigate. But with the help of 2 young enslaved men named William and Pompey, George managed to complete the task successfully. He paid for his freedom with money he earned through his work and bought the freedom of Pompey. Both men became trusted friends and confidants of George, who valued their friendship and intelligence throughout his life. During this time, George also developed an interest in military matters and joined the Virginia militia as a major. In 1751, he inherited his father's estate and took on the management of Ferry Farm, which had been left to his half-brother, Augustine. Upon discovering that his tenant had been neglecting the property, George decided to move there and make it his home. On May 6, 1759, George Washington married Martha Dandridge Curtis, a wealthy widow with 2 young children. They had met for the first time in 1751 and had been courting each other ever since. Despite his deep affection for her, George admitted that she wasn't the most beautiful woman in the world, but he recognized her good qualities, including her beauty. They settled into a large house in New England and began managing his vast estate. But tragedy struck when one of Martha's children died during a visit from smallpox. Determined to protect his wife and her remaining child, George had himself inoculated against the disease, becoming one of the first Americans to do so. When the French and Indian War broke out between Britain and France in North America in 1756, George, now a lieutenant colonel, was placed in command of a Virginia regiment. Unfortunately, he faced many challenges, including a lack of supplies, support, and training for his troops. Despite these obstacles, George demonstrated courage and leadership in battle, achieving some victories against the French and their Native American allies. However, overall, the war was not going well for the British, and in 1758, George's term of service came to an end. He returned home to Mount Vernon and married Martha Dandridge Curtis, a wealthy widow with 2 young children. They had met for the first time in 1751 and had been courting each other ever since. In 1763, following the end of the French and Indian War, George Washington attended the Virginia House of Burgesses and served on a committee to address colonial policy issues. During this time, he continued to grow his estate and cultivate friendships with other prominent Virginians. In 1766, George Washington was appointed to the Governor's Council of Virginia, and in 1769, he was appointed as one of the commissioners of the Northern Neck Patents, responsible for surveying and settling land in that area. These positions provided him with additional income and influence in the colony. However, trouble was brewing on the horizon. In 1770, tensions began to rise between the American colonies and Great Britain. The British government had imposed various taxes and regulations on the colonies, which the colonists felt were unjust and violated their rights as Englishmen. George Washington, while not initially a strong supporter of the growing revolutionary movement, found himself drawn into the conflict. In 1773, he was appointed Commander-in-Chief of the Virginia Militia, and in 1774, he attended the First Continental Congress in Philadelphia, where colonial leaders from 12 colonies met to discuss their grievances with the British government. Although no official separation from Britain was declared at the Congress, many delegates, including George Washington, believed that reconciliation with Britain was unlikely. When the Revolutionary War began in 1775, George Washington was unanimously appointed Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army. This was a pivotal moment in American history, and many hoped that Washington's leadership and reputation would contribute to the success of the struggling army. Though initially hesitant to accept the position, he eventually agreed and traveled to Cambridge, Massachusetts, to take command. Upon arriving at the encampment near Boston, George Washington observed the state of the army and was less than impressed. The troops were poorly equipped and lacked basic supplies, such as shoes and blankets. Many of them were also inexperienced and untrained soldiers. Despite these challenges, Washington worked to improve the situation. He established a headquarters and began to reorganize the army, instituting accounting procedures and creating a system of military courts. Though progress was slow, Washington's efforts began to turn the tide. He secured much-needed supplies and equipment for his troops and began training them in military maneuvers. Additionally, he established the American military's first capital in Watertown, Massachusetts. One of Washington's most significant contributions during this time was his successful campaign to secure foreign support for the American cause. He traveled to France in 1778 and met with King Louis XVI, who ultimately agreed to form an alliance with the United States. This alliance provided the Continental Army with much-needed military and financial aid. By 1781, the Continental Army was better equipped, trained, and organized under Washington's leadership. This was evident in the final major battle of the war, the Battle of Yorktown, in October 1781. In this battle, the Continental Army, aided by French troops and a Navy squadron, trapped a British force led by General Cornwallis in Yorktown, Virginia. After a siege of 9 weeks, Cornwallis surrendered, effectively ending the major fighting of the Revolutionary War. With the war won and peace negotiations underway, George Washington resigned his commission in 1783 and returned to civilian life. However, his contributions to the new nation were far from over. As one of the most respected and influential figures in the country, he was called upon to play a key role in shaping the future of the United States. When it came time to draft a constitution for the new nation, George Washington's leadership and experience were highly valued. He presided over the Constitutional Convention of 1787, which met in Philadelphia to address the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation and create a new governing document. Although Washington did not speak much during the convention, his presence lent legitimacy to the proceedings and helped to ensure a successful outcome. As the newly formed government prepared to launch the nation, there was a question about who should be the first president of the United States, given his military victories, political influence, and stature as a national hero. It is not surprising that George Washington was unanimously elected by the Electoral College in 1789. He was inaugurated on April 30th, 1789, at the age of 57, making him the oldest person to assume the presidency. During his first term, Washington set precedents for the office of the president, such as establishing the cabinet system and creating a protocol for presidential succession. He also made important decisions regarding the nation's finances and foreign policy. One of Washington's most significant achievements during his presidency was the establishment of neutrality in foreign affairs. In 1793, when France and Britain went to war, Washington declared the United States to be neutral, setting a precedent for non-intervention in European conflicts. In 1796, after serving 2 terms, George Washington retired from public life, returning to his beloved Mount Vernon. He had left a legacy of leadership, integrity, and commitment to public service that would inspire generations of Americans to come. Throughout his life, Washington had accumulated significant wealth, owning over 300 slaves at the time of his death. However, in his will, he expressed a desire for all of his slaves to be freed, which they were, in 1801, by his adopted son, Bushrod Washington, according to his wishes. On December 14, 1799, George Washington passed away at Mount Vernon of a throat infection, possibly epilepsy. He was buried on the estate in a simple ceremony attended by only 20 people. Today, his legacy continues to be celebrated in the United States and around the world. The nation's capital, Washington, D.C., as well as numerous schools, streets, and buildings bear his name. And his image appears on the U.S. dollar bill and the quarter. George Washington's life and contributions to the founding of the United States continue to be studied and celebrated, ensuring that his legacy as the nation's first president and one of its most revered founding fathers lives on.